The man who has a conscience suffers while acknowledging his sin. At some point, you have looked at a moral boundary, something that society considers sacred, something you were taught not to cross. And somewhere, very quietly, a thought surfaced within you. My reasons are different, and you probably didn't act on it. But the thought was there, and if you are being honest, that wasn't just once. Dostoevsky wrote a whole novel asking what happens with a person who crosses this moral boundary and who acts on it. And what he found was one of the most uncomfortable things ever written about human mind. Not because Raskolnikov, the protagonist, is a monster, but simply his logic, which was followed by him honestly. It's not that far from thoughts most people have had and simply never finished. There's a specific kind of isolation that comes when you believe that you see through the things that other people are still trapped inside. It starts as an observation, and that part is actually beautiful. But over time, it hardens into identity, and once it becomes identity, it needs to be proved. Raskolnikov is 23, brilliant, and living in a room that Dostoevsky describes as a coffin, 6 feet across. Yellow walls, low ceiling pressing down with summer heat. He has stopped going to university and has stopped paying rents. And by now you must have guessed his financial condition at that time. He barely eats, he walks the city for hours, and when he returns, he just lie down on his couch thinking continuously for hours. And for months he has been constructing a theory. Humanity, he argues, divides into 2 categories. The ordinary, who exist to follow, to maintain, to keep the world exactly as they found it. And the extraordinary, the Napoleon, the Caesars, the founders of civilizations who broke laws, crossed lines, committed what their contemporaries called atrocities, and were later necessary. His conclusion that the extraordinary man has the right to transgress the moral limits if the transgression serves something larger than himself. He published it formally in a journal, and the thing is, most of the people who read Crime and Punishment get this one thing absolutely wrong. They treat the theory of Raskolnikov as absolutely evil, as a delusion of a sick mind, as something a reasonable person would immediately see through. But the theory is not stupid. The critique of inherited morality, the suspicion that the rules handed out by society, religion, and power are not genuinely moral, but simply conditioning, conformity, and the fear of punishment which poses as virtue. That critique has weight, real weight, and I myself think that is quite true. Thinkers far more rigorous than Raskolnikov have made versions of it. The problem is not the questioning, but underneath the philosophy, underneath the theory and the utilitarian calculus, there is something Raskolnikov will not look at directly until he was convicted. He genuinely doesn't want to kill the pawnbroker because her death would benefit the society. He wants to kill her to find out what he is. The murder is a test. He is both the experimenter and the thing being tested. And the specific thing that is being tested is whether his conscience, the ordinary, humbling, human conscience, actually applies to him. Feeling nothing afterward would be the proof. It would confirm that he belongs to the category of people who doesn't just endure history but make it. This is the psychological mechanism Dostoevsky is dissecting. The way a person can take a genuine philosophical insight that inherited morality deserves questioning and quietly hollow it out from the inside, replacing it with ego's need to feel exceptional. The way the language of liberation can become a vehicle for something that was never about liberation at all. Raskolnikov is not a philosopher who is testing out his theory. He is frightened, isolated young man who needs to believe he is extraordinary and has constructed an architecture of thought sophisticated enough to hide that need even from himself. Now, does it sound relatable? That's what most of our modern world is about. And many young men are moving forward with the same psychology that they are extraordinary and they need to be treated as someone who's truly exceptional. This idea is okay, but the source is not. Because most common source that is driving this idea is ego. Coming back to the story, he goes to the apartment on July evening, kills her with an axe. Her sister walks in unexpectedly. He kills her too. Takes some jewelry, leaves, walks back home, lies down, and now the real events start to take place. The experiment produces a result, a theory never accounted for. The collapse arrives as fragmentation. It does not arrive completely at once. The coherent, logical mind that built the justifications begins to fall apart. A fever that is not entirely a fever. Conversations full of hidden meanings, full of guilt, full of fear, and full of heaviness, which he cannot stop looking to. Every question from every direction feels like a closing trap. He cannot look at his mother when she visits. After a long time, she loves him and her love is unbearable now. He keeps on circling back to the detective, Porfiry Petrovich, inserting himself into the investigation, pulled towards the exposure, the way a tongue finds a broken tooth. The detective never accuses him directly. He just talks philosophically, and he even talks about his theory, the theory of Raskolnikov, and questions him on that indirectly. This part of the story was very important because here Raskolnikov starts to lose his demeanor. Even though the detective wasn't accusing him directly, he started to hate him. He asked Raskolnikov about his theory, the extraordinary man theory, about the right to transgress. Each conversation hollows him further. Pain and suffering are always inevitable for a large intelligence and a deep heart. That's what Fyodor Dostoevsky wrote. The intelligence Raskolnikov believed that would elevate him from the ordinary becomes the instrument of his most precise suffering. He cannot stop analyzing, and every analysis circles back to the same place. Somewhere between the fever and the waking, a thought surfaces that unravels everything. Did I kill the old woman? I killed myself. The self that dies is not biological Raskolnikov. It is the constructed one, the extraordinary man, the one above conscience, the one the theory required him to exist. And this is where Dostoevsky says something that goes beyond the novel, beyond Raskolnikov, beyond 1865. The mind can justify anything. It is endlessly flexible, endlessly creative in its capacity for self-deception. But there is something else in human being that keeps a different record, something that was never constituted when the theory was being built. What Raskolnikov discovered is that the conscience, he needed it to be dead for any of this to work, was the most alive thing in him. His failure was not that he questioned morality and the society's constrained moral laws. His failure was the specific quality of consciousness that he brought to that questioning. Ego disguised as insight, personal need disguised as philosophy, the desire to feel extraordinary, dressed so carefully in the language of the extraordinary that even he couldn't see the difference. But later on, he realizes it. And he talks about a dream that pesters him while he was in the jail in Siberia. And the truth Dostoevsky buries in this novel like a knife is this: how would you know? If your reasons felt genuine to you, if your logic was coherent, if your cause felt real, and your conviction felt clean, If you had, like Raskolnikov, constructed the entire justification from inside, how would you know that whether you were seeing clearly or you were just very good at not looking at the thing you didn't want to see? History is full of people who thought they were the exception. Revolutionaries, for example. Some of them were right, some of them were Raskolnikov, and most of them in the moment could not tell which one they were. There is another man in this novel, Svidrigailov, darker than Raskolnikov by almost any measure, and he moves through the story without any fever, without the paranoia, without the visible collapse, unlike Raskolnikov, who was suffering profoundly. He is inexplicably generous in the end. And then one grey morning, he walks outside and shoots himself. Two different relationships from the same act of self-severance from the humanity. Both of them almost in the same way. But there was a subtle shift in Raskolnikov in the end because of Sonia. The love and the compassion that Sonia brings in Raskolnikov's life, which sheds the light of truth upon his mind, makes him see the reality, because Sonia in the novel represents suffering, greatest suffering, and yet intact. What happened with Svidrigailov was that he hasn't transcended conscience, he's buried it. And what lives on the other side of the buried conscience is not freedom. It is the slow inability to want anything real. He was so empty, he was so hollow from inside that there was nothing in the world that could provide him with the feeling of completeness, wholeness. Raskolnikov confesses eventually, goes to the prison in Siberia, and near the very end, Dostoevsky writes, they were both pale and thin, but those sick, pale faces were bright now with the dawn of new future. It is being talked about Raskolnikov and Sonia. The question that this book leaves you with is not whether Raskolnikov was right or wrong. It is whether the line between someone who's acting from genuine clarity, genuinely beyond ego, genuinely in the service of something that is larger than themselves, and someone who has just simply convinced themselves that they are. Whether the line is visible from inside as we need it to be.